here, lying in the sun, and Aristotle came over and stood in front of him and said, "Diogenes, I am Alexander. Is there anything I can do for you?" Because he was so famous. And Diogenes looked up at him and said, "You could get out of my sun." He was blocking the sun. And the general thought, probably Ptolemy, thought, "Oh, that's going to be bad for Diogenes." But instead, Alexander said, according to the story, "If I wasn't Alexander, I would want to be Diogenes." Not a care in the world, basically. So that's the cynic point of view. That's a philosophy. It's, if you think of Aristotle's arguments that your character, your life should be your focus. You should do what makes you happy. This is actually one of the answers. Certainly not one that Aristotle would have approved of. But if you're thinking about what kinds of answers, what kinds of responses would there be to Aristotle, that's certainly one of them. The second one I'd like to bring up as we move along is Epicurus. And Epicurus, sorry, I'm switching from Wikipedia to the Stanford, different ways. There's some good things about the Wikipedia I like, the birth dates and stuff on the side, and death dates and stuff like that. But, and I don't think they give us a picture in this, do they? Do they give us a picture? No, it's just lots of writing. The Epicurean life, etc. Notice the dates here. So he's actually a contemporary of Aristotle, roughly, right? And Epicurus, in response to this idea of living for yourself, basically, your focus on your happiness, Epicurus argues for a life of self-sufficiency. So he's not a cynic. He's not, just going to basically beg for food from people, have sex with himself on a pedestal in the street, bad stuff, Diogenes is famous for. So he's not going to live as a dog. In fact, he's a rich man, and he wants to live in the garden. He wants to grow his own food, have all of his own resources under his control, right? And so he wants to be self-sufficient. I think of this kind of philosophy as associated with the people that want to live out, say, in the bush, perhaps, have their own cabin that they built, maybe, right? And have their own garden around, the area, and then do their own hunting and fishing so that they have enough to eat. Have a family, have kids, but basically live as much off the grid, as they can. They don't want to be really attached to town. They don't want to have the duties and so on that are associated with being part of society. But at the same time, they do want to have all the things as much as they can on their own, right? They don't want to be so attached that, my cell phone doesn't work out here because there's no connection. They don't want to be cell phone users, right? They don't want to have that issue. They don't have to pay a fee. They want to be able to be self-sufficient. So if you think that Epicurus is there, and Epicurus is also famous for a diet. And the idea of the diet is that you eat food that you can make, that's readily available to you, and stay away from weird things. Especially things, like seafood, shellfish and things. And beans. I don't know what it is with beans, something about beans. Apparently they thought, that beans look an awful lot like a fetus. Felt cannibalistic eating beans or something.
Pythagoras forbid people eating beans in his cult.
There's a bunch of folks that don't like beans, and I'm not sure what the heck is behind beans that did that. I mean, I know, today, you're not supposed to eat beans if you're an astronaut, because, that creature on the moon will find you if you fart in your spacesuit. It's a commercial.
No.
Okay. That's all right, sorry. So Epicurus. The reason I bring Epicurus up and focus on the diet issue is for Epicurus, the diet should be moderate. But what's funny is there are restaurants that label themselves Epicurean. And usually the Epicurean restaurants have really weird foods. Also usually very expensive foods. And the funny thing is, well, that really isn't Epicurean. Epicurus would not have recommended that kind of stuff to eat. It's too expensive, you didn't make it yourself, and, who knows what it's going to do to you, right? Because it's so weird. If we, you can go to, actually, I think it was that page, down at the bottom. Oh, be that way. Let's see if I care. I know an easier way. Let's go back. Let's go here. I'm striking out, aren't I? The clouds. I think that's okay. So the clouds. By the way, the play that Socrates brings up in his trial, the Apology, The Clouds, that's on the web. You can certainly read it, and they certainly notice Socrates as a character in the play. And they have him doing really weird things. He's being carried around on a pallet, and he's obviously drunk, and he's going, "I'm flying!" Make him out to be a real fool, and not someone that you want to trust your children with. So that's why he has to defend himself against the clouds. But let me go up, and let me go to how do you spell E? There we go. So let's see. So here's some of the texts by Epicurus. Right? A happy and eternal being has no trouble himself and brings no trouble upon any other being. And this one's cool. Death is nothing to us. For the body, when it has been resolved into its elements, has no feeling, and that which has no feeling is nothing to us. While you're alive, you're not dead, and when you're dead, you're not alive. So no point worrying about being, dead, because you're not. Right? It's kind of fun. The magnitude of pleasure reaches its limit in the removal of all pain. So a goal of life is to have as much pleasure as possible, but be smart about it. Don't go out to an all-night party and get blotto drunk, because believe me, you'll be awful in the morning. You might even be dead, actually. So don't overdo things. Moderation, right? Moderation. Just enjoy a moderate amount of what you like, and don't overdo it, right? Because that's the smart way of doing things. It's impossible to live a pleasant life without living wisely. You have to be smart about this, and well and justly. And it is impossible to live wisely and well and justly without living pleasantly. That's the deal, right? By the way, remember one of the test questions I have is, which of the philosophers that we've discussed do you think a good example for your life, right? Would you follow for your life? Not exactly the question, but so we're looking at kind of the logical choices you can make. You could also pick Aristotle. You could also pick Plato. You could pick Socrates. You could pick Jesus, by the way. It always puzzles me why someone might think, I'm studying philosophy now, but I'm really a Christian, And then when they pick who their philosopher that they would follow is, they pick Socrates, thinking, what about Jesus if you're a Christian? And I think that the thing is that a lot of people don't think God could be a philosopher, or Jesus could be a philosopher, but I mean, he obviously was. So no pleasure is in itself evil, but the things which produce certain pleasures entail annoyances many times greater than the pleasure themselves. Over drinking, for example, things of that sort, sinful things. So this. Notice also, as we're reading through this, that these are individual, verses, if you will, or things, giving you rules of behavior or ideas of behavior. When we, next class, go over some Christian sources, one of the ones that is really fascinating is the Book of Thomas. Ever heard of the Book of Thomas? There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those were the ones that the Nicene Council decided those are the good books that we ought to have everyone read. These other books ought to be destroyed or wiped out. And Thomas was especially picked. We have to get rid of that one. That's bad news. He didn't really get rid of it. As a result, we have full copies of the text today. You can even go online. And one of the things you notice is that it's written very much this way. So it's a book of sayings. It's a sayings gospel, not a history of, say, the life of Jesus. It doesn't conflict with the other ones in the arrangement and time events and so on. Instead, it's just the different things that Jesus said, including some things that didn't make their way into the other official writings. Right? And it's associated with the Gnostics. For example, the text that was discovered in the Nag Hammadi find in the 50s, the 1950s, in the desert across the Nile from a village where two young boys were digging for lime for their garden. They found urns and inside the urns they found all these old texts. And they brought them to the village, and they ended up being, salvaged by a person in the village that knew they were valuable. And now we have not only the Book of Thomas, but other ones that came from the Nag Hammadi find. I should show you that if you want the. So they're there. And why were they there? A monastery that was a Gnostic Christian sect was across the river, and when they got word from the council that they had to destroy certain books, they didn't. They took them across the river and hid them in urns, figuring that later on, when people were saner, they could get them back. But apparently they never got them back. They left them there for us to find 1,800 years later, something like that. So that's cool. So we have those. And the point I bring that up for is because wherever the text was that I was reading, here we go, is written in the same kind of manner as that text. So it's interesting that way. So there they are. These are relatively short works, by the way, compared to the ones we've been looking at before. So the next one, logically, in my mind, as we go across the options that you have following Aristotle, is the Stoics. And when we think of the Stoics, there's actually lots of them. Let's do it this way. And what's neat about the Stoics is that you're enmeshed in your society. Stoa, by the way, the Stoics, the word stoa comes from pillars, or the columns. When you think of the Greek columns, those are a porch, actually. And in fact, Zeno of Citium,